The headline screams that Iran threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz, triggering an immediate assumption in your mind that Tehran is desperate, irrational, or preparing for a suicidal act. The counterintuitive reality is that closing the strait would be economic suicide for Iran itself, as it blocks their own oil exports and triggers global chaos they cannot survive. This video flips the script. What looks like a blackmail attempt is actually a deterrent shield. It is not about doing the damage, it is about holding the world hostage to ensure Tehran does not get crushed by sanctions or military pressure. The stakes are high because if we misunderstand this logic, we misread their next move entirely. To understand why Iran refuses an opening deal while simultaneously threatening closure, we must first discard the idea that they want a permanent shutdown. A total blockade of the strait would halt nearly 15 million barrels per day of global crude oil and gas exports daily. While this number sounds like leverage for Tehran, it is actually their own executioner's rope. Iran relies on roughly 1.5 million barrels per day to sustain its government functions and fund its regional proxies. If they seal the channel completely, they cut off their own revenue stream just as effectively as a foreign blockade would. Therefore, a total closure is not an offensive weapon. It is a defensive last resort, reserved for existential threats, such as the destruction of Karg Island or a complete cutoff of Iranian export capabilities. This creates what strategists call a credibility trap. The United States and its allies face a difficult choice: escalate military action to stop Iran from threatening the strait, risk triggering the very chaos Washington wants to avoid. If Washington strikes hard enough to disable Tehran's naval assets, they may force the IRGC Navy into a corner where their only remaining option is to scatter mines or launch drones that choke global flows. In this scenario, a successful strike against Iranian assets could trigger a global energy crisis that hurts American consumers and allies more than it helps Iran in the short term. This dynamic forces adversaries into a stalemate where both sides endure economic pain rather than cross the line into open warfare. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. The strategic calculus has shifted from attempting to stop nuclear programs entirely to maritime coercion as a tool of regime survival. Tehran believes it can endure severe economic pressure longer than Washington can sustain the political will for military action against them. Recent analysis indicates that hardline elements within the Iranian leadership have grown more confident in this calculation, viewing asymmetric tactics like drone swarms and mine-laying not as acts of war but as necessary insurance policies. They are betting that global markets cannot absorb even a temporary disruption without causing enough political backlash to force Washington back to the negotiating table. This shift explains why we see constant posturing and threats of closure rather than actual implementation. The threat itself is the strategy they need to survive sanctions. However, this shield has limits defined by physical infrastructure and regional alternatives. While Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline offers spare capacity for roughly 2.7 million barrels per day, and UAE facilities at Fujairah port can absorb some volume, these bypasses cannot replace the full throughput of the strait during a total shutdown. Spare OPEC production capacity in the region is largely inaccessible without tanker access to the Gulf through Hormuz. A closure creates immediate global supply shocks that validate Iran's leverage because tankers simply cannot load up from inland fields if they cannot reach the open ocean. The world relies on this narrow choke point for 4.5 million barrels of spare OPEC capacity, but those reserves are trapped behind a gate only one side can control. The paradox is clear. Iran wants to keep the threat alive without acting on it because a closed strait hurts them more than their enemies hurt them. This explains why diplomatic breakthroughs or escalations depend not just on military posturing, but on whether Tehran feels its survival is at stake. If viewers assume Tehran wants to close the strait permanently, they will predict an inevitable war or panic buying. The reality is that Iran views this threat solely as a deterrent shield for economic survival. It exists only to force concessions and ensure regime security. They are not looking for a fight with the entire world. They are looking for enough breathing room to keep their leadership in power while sanctions tighten around them. For policymakers, the challenge lies in recognizing that escalating pressure on Tehran carries its own risks of triggering the exact outcome Washington fears most. If military strikes destroy key Iranian infrastructure like oil terminals or command centers, it removes Iran's ability to walk away from a crisis without losing face or regime stability. This pushes hardline factions toward the only option left: total closure. The window for diplomatic resolution remains open as long as Tehran believes they can outlast political will in Washington rather than being forced into a corner where their own economy collapses alongside global markets. Understanding this dynamic changes how you view every headline about Iranian aggression. It is not about irrational actors seeking chaos. It is about a state using the only asymmetric leverage left to them against overwhelming economic pressure. The threat of closing the strait is real, but the action is unlikely unless Iran's survival is directly threatened. This explains why we see constant swarming and mine-laying threats but no actual closure. The threat is the strategy. For the viewer, this means recognizing that diplomatic breakthroughs or escalations depend not just on military posturing, but on whether Iran feels its survival is at stake. It clarifies why the U.S. often hesitates to escalate, because a successful strike against Iranian assets could trigger the very global chaos Washington wants to avoid. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.